You're listening to the VSL Aviation Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Lake, and I'm here with my friend today, Josh. Josh, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and thanks for joining us on YouTube. This is a video podcast, so if you're listening to this on the on like Apple Podcast or something, join us on YouTube because this does have a lot of visual content. We'll try to be as descriptive as possible so you'll be able to listen to it, but we're covering the subject of airworthiness directives. And we're going to take you through how to look that up on the FAA's website as well as another program. And it's going to be pretty important that you are able to follow along with that.
Yeah, this is a complicated topic. And, you know, even as a CFI, there's a lot of stuff I could still learn on it. I think the biggest problem is, you know, finding out where to get that information as far as if there's an airworthiness directive for your aircraft and what to do once that happens. But maybe we should talk about what is an airworthiness directive first.
All right. Well, that's a good question. So, and when I get this question, or when I ask this question during check rides, the most common answer that I get is an airworthiness directive is like a recall. And that's sort of true, right? You probably know how a recall works. We find something after it's been manufactured and sent out to consumers. There's something wrong with it. And the manufacturer's like, hey, we need that back. We're either going to get rid of that or we need it back and we're going to fix it. This happened with one of my vehicles, had a recall on the airbags. So we had to take it to the shop, had the airbags fixed. And the danger was if the airbags went off, it could hurt you. So that's a great example of a recall. And that's also kind of how ADs work is at some point after the initial manufacturing and release of this component, and there's four ADs. There's a AD on an airframe, engine, propeller, and accessories. So those are all things that could have ADs. So a big one would be like hull 172 has an AD against it, right? That would be a major AD. Something else that I've seen is just a component. So like maybe a vacuum pump has an AD against it, or a magneto, or a cylinder. I've even seen them for, there was a propeller shop that was doing like really bad work, and there was an AD against anybody who had a propeller overhauled at this propeller shop. So they can get very specific.
Yeah.
And just because there's an AD out there that, let's say your friend has a plane that has an AD against it, and you have a plane that's very similar, y'all might have different ADs because they're very specific. They can be down to serial numbers, affecting either serial numbers of aircraft or components.
Yeah, and so I think this gets into like, how do I know which ADs my airplane has? And I've always been confused on this. You talked about a little bit ago a Cherokee, Cherokee 140s, Cherokees having a wing spar AD.
Yeah. So if you look in the Cherokee fleet or the PA-28, you'll see that there's an AD. In fact, that would be a good one. I mean, we could pull that up to see what an AD looks like. So to find ADs, you're going to go to the Dynamic Regulatory System, or DRS. This is this new system that the FAA released within the last year. And DRS is where you can find all the airworthiness directives that are out there. Now, if there's a specific AD I'm looking for, I'll use my friend Google first to figure out the... now, I wouldn't use this to like, what are all the ADs for a PA-28? But we just want to look up this wing AD spar. So I don't have it memorized. So I'm just going to search Piper wing spar AD. There it is, wing spar AD. And I'm going to find the AD number of what is this AD? And then I'll show you how to look it up on the site, and kind of we'll parse through what the AD looks like on here. So we can find the docket number here. So I'll scroll down on the Google search results and basically find the AD number. And that an AD number is usually a numeric number that's sparsed out with a date, a year date, so 2020. So this AD came out in the year 2020. And then it's -24-05. So that's the AD number. So once we found the AD number, then we're going to go back into DRS and we're going to just put in the AD number 2020-24-05 and hit apply on our filter. And sure enough, there's our wing spar AD. So we found our AD number. We're just going to click on that, and it's going to open up a PDF document. And then this PDF document is the AD. So there's a lot of reading an AD can kind of be like reading a phone book. If you've never read one before, there's a lot of stuff on this PDF document, and it's a little hard for somebody that hasn't had experience reading ADs to kind of decipher what it actually is saying. But if you just kind of take a couple deep breaths and just think kind of basic, what it's telling you is you scroll down and you see the FAA is giving you a little bit of background about, okay, where did this AD originate from? And it gives you kind of a narrative example of where this AD came from. And this uses the acronym NPRM, and that stands for Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. So basically, enough has happened on this wing spar that the FAA is like, okay, we've had enough accidents related to the wing spar that we are going to propose to do an AD. And once they do that, the public has, I believe, 60 days or a couple months to respond to that. And anybody can do this. So anybody can log on to the FAA website, see proposed rulemakings, and they can go on and they say, I don't think this should be an AD, or I think your math was wrong on how much this is going to cost. Because what the FAA has to do on an AD is they have to justify the reason for the AD. So the reason for the recall, why are they doing that? And then they also have to have an estimate of how much it's going to cost an aircraft owner to comply with this AD. And that's something that's up for debate during the NPRM process, that a lot of owners might want to jump on there. And really, it's not necessarily single owners. It's usually big shops that are saying, hey, you said that this would take 10 hours of labor to repair, but in our experience, it's actually 15, so we think your math is off, something like that. So there would be a narrative example, and then it will come down to the cost. Here's the cost of compliance. So the FAA estimates that it's over 11,000 aircraft are going to be impacted by this AD. Again, it's the labor cost is 2 hours of work, $85 per hour, so $170 to inspect both wings. There's no parts required. And so the cost on U.S. operators is $1,950,920 per inspection cycle. So they're just extrapolating that $170 out over, I think, the lifetime of the AD or something. So there's a little bit of math that goes in there. Anyway, you can finally scroll down to the actual Airworthiness Directive, the important one here. So all that was kind of the leading up to what resulted in the AD. And then several pages in, we finally get to the actual AD itself.
Where it tells you what you need to do.
Correct. And then the real important paragraph here is applicability. So this AD applies to the following Piper aircraft, and it starts listing model numbers and serial numbers. So we go through all of that. Now, the compliance is the next section, and it says we have to comply this AD within compliance time specified unless already done. So then it goes in further about the compliance time. It says within the next 100 hours time in service after the effective date of this AD, or within the next 12 months after the effective date of this AD, whichever occurs first, and thereafter at intervals not to exceed 7 years, and it goes through the inspection. Yeah. So what this tells me is I've got 100 hours to comply with this, or within the next 12 months, whichever occurs first. That's when I have to have this AD done. So when this comes out, I've got a little bit of time here. Now, depending on the urgency of this AD, that number might be a lot smaller.
Yeah.
It might be 5 hours. I've never seen it at 0. I'm sure there's instances where the FAA's just said, okay, these planes cannot fly until you comply with this AD. That's very rare in my experience. Usually it's 100 hours or within the next annual inspection, you have to comply with this AD.
Yeah. So
that's kind of what it looks like. Now, this AD in particular is a little interesting because, or it might not actually be this one, but there's some ADs where it only applies and you have to do a little formula to figure out how many flying hours your plane's done in the past. And so the applicability is really important. So if you just see an AD that affects a 172, it may not be yours, or just affects a Piper, it may not be yours. You have to look at the serial numbers that it affects.
Okay. And I think we're going to talk about that here in a second. Like, I've got an airplane. How would I know where to find those? And I think, for a lot of people, the first starting point for that is going to be to look in the logbooks.
Right.
And in a lot of situations, the ADs are going to already be in the logbooks, or they should be in the logbooks, I should say.
Yeah, they should be. Again, if you're buying an airplane, something that needs to happen in the pre-purchase inspection is figuring out if the ADs that are in the logbook are all of the ADs, or are the appropriate ADs, because I've definitely experienced times where ADs, I call it pencil whipped. The AD is signed off, AD complied with. Well, that doesn't meet the standard, right?
Yeah.
The AD, according to Part 91, it says that the AD, you have to log the AD name, the number, the date it was complied with, the method of compliance, and the next due date. Those are the things that I need to see in the logbook, or an AD list, which a lot of owner-operators will have a separate AD list from their log that will list all of that information. Okay. So, you would want to, you don't just take them at face value. You want to, when you buy an airplane, first of all, you want to have a general idea of how many ADs does this plane have. That's something that a good pre-purchase inspection, somebody doing that pre-purchase inspection would do for you, is saying, hey, most 172s, depending on serial number of all their appliances, will have 24 ADs, something like that.
Okay, so if I'm just an average owner, what's kind of a starting point for me if I don't see these?
Yeah, so if you don't see them, well, let's do your plane.
Okay.
How about, you got a 172, right?
Yeah.
So we're on our dynamic regulatory system website.
Okay.
We're going to clear out this AD number here. We don't need that, and we're just going to look up, see how many ADs we can find for your Cessna. Okay, so we're going to search the make of Cessna Aircraft Company, and we're going to choose the model 172H.
Yep, 172H.
Okay. We'll try to just clear out the make. We'll just search the model. Let's see how many results we get. Okay, we get 36 results.
36, okay.
So there's 36 results right here for your Cessna 172H for your ADs. Now, if you start reading through these, again, this isn't the whole AD. It's just kind of a short subject heading and stuff of a particular AD. Not all of these are going to apply. So you would really need to read through each one of these ADs. So vacuum pump, for instance, AD 2006-0308. We'd have to open this up. We would have to read the applicability section of the AD. So we'd scroll down until we see the paragraph that says applicability. Again, we don't really care about all that other stuff. We want to get to what airplanes are affected by this AD right here. So then we would have to find this does apply to me. Okay.
And
so
if I have that vacuum pump,
right,
basically. And
so we would go through all that. And then finally we would have our AD list. And this allows us to save the list results in Excel format. So we can just save list results. I'll just save it right there. And then I'll go here to my downloads, and I can pull up, here's my Excel printout of all 36 ADs that we just looked up.
And these aren't necessarily the ones that we have. We would have to look up each individual one of these to see if they're applicable to us.
Correct. You'd have to go through, read the narrative, read the applicability section, see if it applies to your plane. If it doesn't, cross it off. If it does, leave it on there.
And then some of these are also superseded by other ones.
Correct. Yeah.
And they'll say that if that's the case.
Yeah, they'll say that because, I'm glad you brought that up, because let's say we had an AD back in the 70s. We discovered that there was a problem with the AD or something, and we supersede it with a new AD.
Yeah.
And so both of those ADs are still in existence. It's just one is superseded and no longer applicable, and we have this new one.
Yeah. And so what am I looking at here? Am I looking at only the airframe ADs in this
Yeah,
example?
so after you do all that, that takes some time, but we're only like halfway there now.
Yeah, this seems pretty complicated.
Yeah, because this is just the airframe, and typically the airframe will have the lion's share of the ADs.
Yeah.
But you got to remember, our airframe has ADs in addition to our propeller, our engine, and our accessories. So we'd need to take a step back. We need to go out to your plane with a notepad and pencil and start writing down serial numbers and part numbers of all of your accessories. And just think of an accessory as anything you can unbolt from the engine. So a vacuum
From the
pump,
engine itself. Okay.
or the plane. So you could have an AD on avionics, for instance.
Yeah, that's true.
I think the Garmin G5 recently had an AD having to do with the battery. So you would need to know all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Of all your accessories, basically. Then once you have all of your accessories, now you can go to the FAA's website and start searching for ADs for all of those accessories that you have. And then you could compile your list. And then you have to go through and make a checklist, basically, and say, how did I comply with this? When is the next date of compliance? And the AD number and name. Now, a lot of these are just one-time ADs, right? That's the other big distinguisher between ADs is you have one-time ADs and you have reoccurring ADs.
Yeah.
So
I think one for Cessna is the seat rail.
Yeah.
The seat rail is
the seat rail.
once a year, I believe. It's in the
That's
annual
one of my
inspection.
favorite. Yeah. So it's right here. We're going to open up the seat rail AD and see how long it takes to load here. That's 2011-1009 is the seat rail AD. And this affects all ADs here, or all Cessna 172s, and a lot of the Cessna fleet it affects, actually. So if we can see that it applies to that, and when we go down to the actual AD itself, we can see how often this needs to be done. So here's all of our applicable 172s, applicability, 150s, 152s, 170s, or 172s, 175s, all the Cessnas.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an older Cessna, this probably applies. And then it says comply with the AD, and then every the last inspection done or within the next 12 calendar months of the effective date, and then repetitively thereafter. Repetitively do these actions at intervals not to exceed 100 hours, time in service, or every 12 months, whichever occurs first. So this becomes a 100-hour AD or an every year.
Annual,
if you're flying your plane less than 100 hours, you got to do it every annual. If you're flying it more than 100 hours a year, you need to do this AD every 100 hours. So that's a good point for an owner-operator. We've both covered in videos before, you don't have to have a 100-hour inspection if you're an owner-operator.
Yeah.
However, if you have a 100-hour AD, that does have to be complied with.
So if you're flying more than 100 hours and
Right.
you have this 100 hours a year, I should say, and you have this AD, then you may actually need to do that AD sooner.
Right. So let's say I'm a flight school owner. I'm tired, or that's a bad example, because if I'm a flight school owner, I'm doing 100 hours. Let's say I'm a personal owner and I'm flying this plane 300 hours a year, and I'm tired of having to do 300-hour seat rail checks. Can I do something else? Well, you can in this case, and that's for most ADs. You'll have what's called an AMOC, and that's an alternate method of compliance. And whenever you go to do an AMOC, you basically install something on the plane that relieves you of having to do this AD anymore. So now this AD isn't applicable to you anymore. So the alternate method of compliance here, it says the FAA has the authority to approve an AMOC, and then before using any approved AMOC, notify your appropriate principal inspector, basically the FSDO. So what this is saying is that a company, and this has happened with this specific condition, is a company's basically engineered a lock for your seat rails that has gotten approved via a supplemental type certificate that you can install on the plane, and then that counts as an AMOC for this AD, and you never have to comply with it again. But you have the trade-off is you have to go buy that STC, have it installed on your plane.
Yeah, I've actually seen those now that you say that.
Yeah, so that's a way that you can kind of get around an AD is
Okay.
through an alternate method of compliance.
That's good to know. So even with all that, this is pretty complicated. Is there
Yeah.
another way around this?
Fortunately, there's an easier way.
Okay.
Are you nervous about an upcoming check ride? Have you ever wondered what it's like to be a designated pilot examiner? In this show, I give you a behind-the-scenes look of the FAA check ride process. I'll show you best practices on how to have a successful check ride, common errors that applicants struggle with, and share with you some of the valuable knowledge I've gained throughout my 15-year career in military and civilian aviation. For more information about the show, visit our website, vsl.aero/podcast. There you'll find the show library, various ways to support the show, and links to purchase our interactive Airman Certification Standards Study Guide. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. Most importantly, tell your aviation friends about the show. This is listener-supported content, and I plan on keeping it that way. So any way you can support the show through Patreon or PayPal is greatly appreciated. Consider how much you would normally pay for an hour of ground school with an experienced CFI. Thanks for listening, and back to the show. Before, we talked about pre-purchase inspections. We've talked about AMPs. So a good AMP mechanic will have a program that's designed to make this whole process a lot more streamlined and a lot easier. Because you can imagine it's easy. First of all, it's difficult to find all the ADs, and then it would be easy to overlook something using the FAA's website. I mean, it's free. That's great, but it's not very user-friendly.
Yeah.
And then we still have to construct some sort of checklist to even make that usable.
Yeah.
So I use a program called AD Toolbox. And this isn't an advertisement for AD Toolbox. There's other programs out there, but AD Toolbox is one of the big ones, and it's $500 a year for me to use. It makes sense for me because I've got multiple airplanes to keep track of. If you're an owner, just find a good mechanic that has a program like this. And that would be one of the first questions that I have for a mechanic is what system do you use to keep track of airworthiness directives? If your mechanic says, I don't use a system, I just go to the FAA website and it's free.
He's a liar.
I don't know if I believe that because the FAA system is kind of hard to use.
Yeah, it is very hard.
Not very streamlined.
I've tried to use it multiple times and it's...
Yeah. Maybe he's got it down. There's some old school mechanics that I'm sure have got a good handle on it.
And there's probably like a list, listings too.
Right, but those are all third-party services. So I'm going to show you how easy this is in a system design for this.
Yeah.
So first off, we're gonna do your airplane.
Okay, sounds good.
So we're gonna do a Cessna 172, and we're gonna search that, and we're gonna pick out your 172. H right here.
Cessna 172H.
So we're just going to view AD list. So right there, man, already this looks a lot easier to read. It's got the subject of the ADs. And so I could even put in your serial number right here, and I could check it for a serial number because remember ADs are sometimes specific to a serial number of a plane.
It affects certain serial numbers.
Yeah, in this case, that didn't change. It's still current AD. So we're going to go ahead and create report off of that. And so we have the beginnings of what is an AD report right here. We've got your airframe, tail number, and serial number. And we have 28 airframe ADs. And now down here, we've got an engine. Now we're going to select your engine. So we're going to select...
0300D.
0300D, and we're going to add that selected engine. Now, if you had an STC for a different engine, we could look that up too.
Yeah.
But we're going to put the 0300D, and then we're going to select your propeller. I believe you've got this Macaulay right here. We're going to add selected propeller. Again, you could look up a different one. And then we're going to scroll down and do selected appliance ADs, because remember, you could have appliances. So right now, we have 548 appliance ADs to choose from. That's a lot. So fortunately, this program says, hey, here's some suggested appliance ADs. And these are just ADs that are these are just appliances that are common on 172. Because that 548 number, that's for all appliance ADs.
Yeah.
So if there's like a AD on a, a fan blade.
Yeah.
You probably don't need to waste time looking at that because you don't have any fan blades on your,
No.
unless, is it a turbine? 172 turbine conversion?
I haven't got that far yet.
So looking at these suggested ADs, though, you kind of get a picture of what are some appliances that could have ADs. So we have avionics, we've got autopilots. I see the Garmin EFIS fuel quantity disparities. We've got inflatable door seals by this guy Bob Fields. He probably designed an STC for inflatable door seals, and it wound up getting an AD put against it. So that could be on there. So we're going to scroll down until we get to magnetos, because the magnetos are appliances that, in my experience, they have a lot of ADs against them. They're very critical items. Therefore, they're causal in a lot of accidents when they fail. So it's just, if you imagine something that can cause an accident, there's a good likelihood there could be an AD against something like that.
Okay.
Having a mag fail or a dual mag fail that could cause an accident, there's probably an AD. And sure enough, a lot of these Bendix mags have them. So we're going to select your 051206, and then maybe you've got a Precise Flight vacuum pump. Now, I don't actually know if you have these appliances.
Yeah, I would have to physically look at each individual item and write down the serial number. And, a good mechanic, he's probably going to have all this stuff in the log. He should be putting this stuff in the log.
Exactly. So in a pre-purchase inspection, I would be going through, again, with my pencil and paper, finding all of the appliances, carburetors, magnetos, fuel pumps, avionics, all that. I'm going to come back to my computer. I'm going to open up AD Toolbox, and I'm going to add all that stuff on there.
Yeah. And
you noticed, we've been at this about the same length that we were on the FAA site, looking up just airframe.
The airframe only, yeah.
And now AD Toolbox has kind of organized everything for us. It reminds us, hey, we've got 7 superseded ADs. So we would need to verify that those are able to be deleted. But we could say, okay, let's go ahead and delete those superseded ADs. So now we're just dealing with the current ADs, and then we can go to a dynamic style printout, and it creates this really nice checklist.
Yeah, that is nice.
That meets Part 91 requirements for logging Airworthiness Directive compliance. So I just need to print this out, hand it to my AMP, and they do the rest. So what you would do here is, notice there's a REC column. That's your reoccurring.
Yeah.
So this fuel selector valve placard, that's not a reoccurring AD. So if I need to go back in the logbooks and see when that was complied with. Now, this AD came out in 1971. So I would have to, if it was a plane we were just buying, I might have to go back to like the original logbook or maybe the second logbook to find, okay, when did they put the placard on the fuel? I would find that, and I would say, okay, they complied with this in September of 1971. And I would, in the method of compliance, I would just put PCW, which stands for previously complied with. And then I would sign and date that as the AMP. So I'm saying I didn't comply with that AD, but that I verified that AD was complied with.
Gotcha.
So I would put PCW and then see logbook entry September 1971. So I would go through with each one of those individually.
Okay.
If it's reoccurring, depends on the cycle. Is it every 100 hours? Is it every 500 hours? Is it every 12 years? What is the cycle there? In all cases, I want this whole thing to be filled out.
Yeah.
Right? So some things that I see that I don't like, especially as a DPE, is when they write sideways and they put CW and write a line like they complied with all of them. No, you didn't. So I won't take it as far as saying you're lying to me, but that's not the truth. Like if you just say you did all of these ADs, no, you didn't. A lot of these ADs take a lot of work to do, and they were done, but they were done years ago. So just write that. Just say, hey, I didn't do this, but it was done 10 years ago. Yeah. Look in this logbook and you'll find the entry. That's what I'm looking for. I'll also see the general statement of all ADs complied with. That drives me crazy. Because I can't really accept that as a DPE. I need to make sure all the ADs are complied with, and I would love to just take you at your word.
Yeah.
But I've been burned too many times to trust that. Yeah, if I see all ADs complied with, I'm like, okay, well, prove it. Where's your AD list? Because we're talking about decades of maintenance that this goes back that we need to be able to.
And so you're saying, so this specific AD toolbox, it gives you the format that you have, and there are certain required things that you have to see, or that has to be documented, I guess.
Yeah, so you need to document the AD. So on every annual, basically, what you need to have is the AD number, the name, the date of compliance, the method of compliance, and the next due. Those need to be the 5 things that I see at a minimum.
Yeah.
And as you can tell, there's a lot of ADs. So if I was having to do that in the logbook, it would take up a lot of space. So what I typically do, and a lot of other maintenance shops do, is I've gotten into the habit of saying, see attached AD list for AD compliance. That's the only entry that goes in the annual or the 100-hour. So that tells whoever's looking at that manual or that logbook of, oh, there's an attached AD list. And then I go to the AD list, and it's printed out in the 8.5 by 11, in a binder, and they can flip through and they can see all the ADs and how they're complied with. And if it's in this style, this is the FAA style, this meets all the requirements of Part 91, and there's no question that your plane is airworthy. If it's done any other way, there's going to be questioned by me if your plane's airworthy, because it's really hard for me to cipher through everything to see. And I don't have time, if we're doing a check ride, I don't have time to dig through, 40 years of logbooks to verify that the AD was complied with, 40 years ago. I just don't have time for that. So nobody got time for that.
Ain't nobody got time for
that. So this is how a true airworthiness directive tracking system would work. And there's multiple solutions out there. I think in general they're all better than what the FAA gives us. And that's not to disparage the FAA at all.
Yeah.
The FAA's job isn't to give us a good system to track ADs. It's to give us ADs.
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
It's our job as owners to keep track of those.
Yeah.
And so that's where all these third-party software systems come in and help.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess the moral of the story is, you kind of get what you pay for when it comes to picking an A&P. If you just pick your friend from down the street who just got his A&P and he doesn't have, a good way to document or get all this information, you might not be doing yourself a service by using him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you have and there's nothing wrong with these mechanics. I've known and worked with many of these mechanics. Yeah. But if you're working with a mechanic that pulls up and he's got a toolbox in the back of his truck and he's got the cheapest annuals in the area, you might want to be careful. Because if he, peels out a sticker, slaps it in your logbook, and it says annual completed on this date, all ADs complied with, and his signature. I've literally seen annuals that are maybe 2 sentences long. That really scares me as an owner because I've never been involved in an inspection that only is 2 sentences long.
Yeah.
It takes me more than 2 sentences just to explain
what was done.
Yeah, just the basic inspection. I go into very great detail in my logbook entry saying I inspected the airplane in accordance with the airplane's inspection manual with this revision date using this checklist, and I accomplished the 5 things below, and it's kind of the standard things almost every annual or every 100-hour. And then in addition to that, I've got the unscheduled maintenance things that I did. So, we found this broken and we replaced this screw, and, we go into pretty great detail. So that's kind of what I'm accustomed to. And that just shows me, hey, that mechanic has attention to detail. He logged it in accordance with Part 91. And I'm a lot more confident about that mechanic's work than if I see a 2-sentence annual. I'm really leery of that airplane. I don't. Yeah. So that's my thought process on it, though.
Okay, cool. Well, this has been a real big help. I know that because, I've dealt with, just paying, getting a cheaper annual done in the past. And it's like, well, how do you know which ADs, are complied with? And, now we've kind of got our logbook under control. But in the beginning, it was like trying to find all this information, from all over Kingdom Come and digging through the FAA's website. It's a complicated process.
It is. And, let me remind everybody that, first of all, I know aviation is expensive, right? And getting into the cost of a pre-purchase inspection. If you, and I'm not an A&P yet. I'm kind of an A&P apprentice. But I work with a lot of A&Ps, and their hourly rate is between $85 and $150 an hour, depending on the experience and their location. So part of what you're paying for is if you show up to get a pre-purchase inspection done and the logbooks are a mess and your A&P winds up charging you $3,000 and you have kind of sticker shock. This is what they're doing. They're having to sit down, take time out of their day where they could be out making $85 or $150 an hour working on airplanes and turning wrenches. Instead, they're doing AD research. And you might even see that as a line item on some inspections. You'll see a line item for AD research, and you'll see 8 hours at $85 an hour, and you're like, oh, spend over $1,000
just on research.
On AD research. That seems like I could do that. Well, you could. But you could also, I think it's money well spent to pay somebody who's very experienced on looking up ADs to do it for you and making sure that you're in compliance with that.
Yeah. Well, this has been awesome. I'm definitely a deep subject. I'm glad we made a separate episode for this.
Yeah. So if you have questions on ADs, you feel free to leave it in the comments. I can answer what I can. If you'd like to hear more about this, like maybe get even more in the weeds, I could probably do that. I'm pretty good at getting into detailed information. Maybe even look at some actual, ADs from different aircraft. But anyway, hope you've enjoyed this discussion. Hope you found it useful. And stay tuned. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. See ya.